my father died, I was 31,000 feet in the air, somewhere over the Atlantic, running a training exercise with my unit. I didn't find out until I landed. 14 missed calls from my aunt. One voicemail from my brother, which I almost didn't listen to. When I finally did, standing outside the terminal with my bag still on my shoulder, he said the words in the same tone he used to tell me dinner was ready when we were kids. Flat. Casual. Like it was information and nothing more. Dad passed this morning. Funeral's Friday. You don't have to come if you're busy. I stood there for a long moment. The cars kept moving through the pickup lane. A woman nearby was crying into her phone, something about a flight delay. I thought about calling him back. I didn't. I came home anyway. My name is Brooke Callahan. I'm 34 years old. I'm a warrant officer in the United States Army, currently assigned to a logistics coordination unit out of Fort Campbell. I've been in for 11 years. I've done 2 tours. I've rebuilt supply chains in places most people will never find on a map, under conditions I don't always talk about. I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because it matters for what came next. My father, Gerald Callahan, owned a trucking company in eastern Tennessee. Nothing huge, about 40 drivers, 3 regional contracts, a dispatch office above an auto parts store on Route 11. He built it from 1 truck and a paper logbook. He was proud of it in the quiet way that men like him are proud of things they made with their hands. He didn't frame certificates. He didn't give speeches. He just showed up every single day for 30 years. When I enlisted, he didn't say much. He folded his arms, looked at me across the kitchen table, and said, "You sure?" I said yes. He nodded. That was our conversation. My brother Nathan was different. Nathan went to business school. He joined the company right after graduation. He wore shirts that needed ironing and learned how to talk to lawyers and bankers. And my father handed him the operations manager role when he was 26. I don't resent that. Nathan was there. I wasn't. I chose a different life, and I understood the trade-off. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't have anticipated, was how completely that choice would be used against me. The funeral was held at the same church where I was baptized. Small place, white clapboard, a parking lot full of cracked asphalt, and people I hadn't seen in a decade. I wore my dress uniform. Not to make a statement. It was the most respectful thing I owned, and my father was a man who believed in showing up properly. My sister-in-law, Trina, looked at me when I walked in like she was surprised I had made the effort. She hugged me in that particular way women sometimes do when they mean something else entirely. Brief, light, over before it started. "We weren't sure you'd make it," she said. "Of course I made it," I said. She smiled and turned away. The service was fine. People said the right things. Someone played Amazing Grace on a piano that was slightly out of tune. I held it together until they carried the casket outside, and then I didn't. And they stood behind a maple tree for 3 minutes and breezed until I could go back. After the burial, we went to my parents' house, my mother's house now, I suppose, though that word felt wrong, the house where I grew up. Split-level, beige siding, a tire swing in the backyard that had been there since I was 7. My mother, Ruth, sat in the living room accepting condolences with the kind of controlled grief that I have always associated with women of her generation. She was holding a rosary she doesn't use anymore and nodding at whatever people said to her. I sat beside her for a while. I held her hand. She leaned her head against mine for a moment and then sat back up. We didn't need to say much. My mother and I have always understood each other in the spaces between sentences. Nathan was in the kitchen with his business partner, a man named Greg Holloway who had no reason to be at my father's reception. They were talking quietly. When I walked in to get a glass of water, they stopped. "Sorry," Greg said, "not to me." He picked up his jacket and left through the back. I looked at my brother. "Nice time for a business meeting," I said. "It wasn't a meeting," he said. "And you've been gone a long time, Brooke. There are things you don't understand about how this works now. I let it go. It was our father's reception, and I was tired from the flight and the grief and the whole weight of it. And I told myself the business stuff could wait. I told myself Nathan was stressed and people deal with grief in strange ways. I told myself a lot of things that week. I was wrong about most of them. 2 days after the funeral, my mother called me into the kitchen and told me my father had updated his will. 18 months before he died, I sat down slowly. She put a copy on the table. She didn't look at me when she did it. The company, the whole thing, 40 drivers, 3 contracts, the building, the equipment, the accounts, had been left entirely to Nathan. That part I had expected, more or less. What I had not expected was the clause regarding the house. My father had bought a second property when I was overseas on my second tour, a small farm about 40 minutes outside of town. 8 acres, a pond, a barn that needed work. He'd told me about it in a letter once, said he was thinking it might be a good place to retire someday. He never got to retire. He died at 61 from a cardiac event in his office on a Tuesday morning, at the desk where he had sat for 30 years. That property, according to the updated will, also went to Nathan. There was a note at the bottom, a handwritten addendum, initialed but not witnessed separately, that said Nathan would provide reasonable financial support to my mother for the remainder of her life. Not a trust, not a specific amount, reasonable support. At Nathan's discretion. I read it 3 times. My mother was looking out the window at the yard. "Mom?" I said. "I know," she said. "Did you know about this, the update?" She was quiet for a moment. He mentioned he was thinking about simplifying things, making sure the business stayed intact. I didn't know about the farm. The farm he bought while I was deployed. Brooke, I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want to understand. She turned around. She had the look she gets when she's choosing her words very carefully. Your brother talked to your father a lot in those last 2 years. About the company. About the future. I think. She stopped. Started again. I think your father may not have had the full picture of certain things. I asked her what she meant. She shook her head. She said she was tired and she needed to lie down, and she went upstairs and closed the door, and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time staring at my father's signature on a document that felt like it had been written by someone else. I drove out to the farm that afternoon. There was a padlock on the gate that I didn't have a key for. I parked on the shoulder and climbed the fence, which, technically, I probably wasn't supposed to do, since it was no longer mine to access, if it had ever been. But I needed to see it. It was quiet out there, just wind and the sound of the pond and somewhere a crow making its point about something. The barn needed paint. The grass was overgrown. But the land itself was solid and gentle, and I could see exactly why my father had wanted it. You could breathe out there in a way that you couldn't breathe anywhere else. I sat on the fence rail for a while and thought about what my mother had said. That my father might not have had the full picture. Nathan had been managing the company for 5 years. He had access to the accounts, the contracts, the relationships. He was the one who sat across the table from the lawyers when they drafted documents. He was the one who had been present when our father was making decisions. I'm not saying Nathan forged anything. I'm not saying that. But I know what it looks like when someone steers a conversation toward a predetermined destination. I've seen it done in logistics debriefs, in contract negotiations, in situations where one person has more information than the other and uses that asymmetry carefully. I know the shape of it. I drove back to town and called a lawyer. Her name was Christine Faber. She had an office above a dry cleaner on Main Street, a Harvard Law diploma on the wall, and the kind of direct manner that made me trust her immediately. She poured us both coffee without asking and listened while I talked for 45 minutes without interrupting me once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about the handwritten addendum," she said. I slid the copy across the desk. She read it, set it down, This isn't properly witnessed. In Tennessee, a holographic addendum can be valid if it's entirely in the testator's handwriting, but this one is typed with a handwritten initials. That's a hybrid that creates issues. Can it be challenged? It can be examined, she said carefully. The more important question is whether the underlying will itself reflects your father's actual intentions, or whether those intentions were influenced in a way that could constitute undue influence. She looked at me. Did your father have any documented cognitive decline in those final years? Not that I know of, but I was overseas. Are there people who knew him who might have noticed changes? His office manager. She was with him for 15 years. Christine nodded slowly. I'm not promising you anything, she said. What I'm saying is that there may be grounds to examine this more carefully. The question is whether you want to. I thought about sitting on that fence rail. I thought about the crow. I thought about my father building something for 30 years and what he would have wanted done with it. I want to understand what actually happened, I said, whatever that means. What it meant, I learned over the next 6 weeks, was a great deal of paperwork and a great deal of silence from my brother. Christine filed for a formal review of the estate. Nathan's lawyer, a firm out of Nashville which told me something, responded within 48 hours with a letter that was professional and thorough and designed to signal that this would not be easy. Nathan himself did not call me. He texted once, "You're making a mistake." I did not respond. My mother stayed out of it officially, which I understood. She was 60 years old and grieving, and she did not need to be pulled into a legal dispute between her children. But she called me every few days. We talked about other things, the weather, a neighbor's new dog, a recipe she was trying. Underneath all of it was the conversation we weren't having, and we both knew it was there. Christine, meanwhile, was doing what Christine does. She talked to my father's office manager, a woman named Dolores, who had been with him since the company had 7 trucks. Dolores had a lot to say. She said that in the last year of my father's life, Nathan had begun attending every meeting my father had with outside parties, accountants, contractors, the bank. She said there were several occasions where Nathan had answered questions before my father could. She said she had mentioned it to my father once and he had waved it off, saying Nathan was just enthusiastic. She said she hadn't been comfortable and she hadn't known what to do about it. She also said that my father had talked about me, often and well. He kept a photo of me in uniform on his desk. He had told Dolores once that he worried I didn't know how proud he was of me, that he hadn't said it enough, that he hoped I knew anyway. I had to stop reading Christine's notes at that point. I went for a run, 4 miles, faster than usual. When I came back, I kept reading. The most significant thing Dolores told Christine was about a conversation she had overheard approximately 2 years before my father's death. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Nathan had been talking to my father about the will, about how complicated things would be if the assets were split, about how it would be better for the company and for our mother if everything was consolidated under one owner who was already embedded in the operations. My father had said something about wanting to take care of both his kids. Nathan had said something back that Dolores couldn't hear clearly. And 2 months later, my father had updated the will. Christine said it wasn't a smoking gun. She said it was a thread, and threads could be followed. The hearing was set for a Thursday in November. I drove down from Fort Campbell the night before. My mother offered me my old bedroom, and I took it because I didn't want to be alone in a motel. I lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling, at the water stain that had been there since I was 12, at the glow-in-the-dark stars I had put up when I was 8 and that had never been taken down. In the morning, I put on my dress uniform, same reason as the funeral. It was the most respectful thing I owned, nothing more. The courthouse was a 40-year-old building with fluorescent lighting and a parking lot that flooded when it rained. There were only a handful of people there. This was a probate matter, not a trial, no jury, no audience to speak of. Christine met me outside. She looked at my uniform and gave a small, professional nod. Nathan arrived with his lawyer and did not look at me. We went inside. I want to be honest about what I was feeling in that room. It was not confidence. It was not righteous certainty. I had learned in 11 years of military service that the difference between competence and bravado is that competence knows how much it doesn't know. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if Christine's threads would hold. I didn't know if the judge would see what I saw, or whether the whole thing would be cleanly dismissed, and I would drive back to Fort Campbell, having done nothing but cost myself money and damage my relationship with my brother beyond repair. What I knew was that I owed it to my father to ask the question. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Patricia Aldridge. She had the focused stillness of someone who has heard a great many stories and learned to wait for the part that matters. She read through the initial filings without expression. Nathan's lawyer made his opening argument: orderly succession, business continuity, the testator's clear intent. Christine made hers: procedural irregularities, evidence of systematic influence, questions about the conditions under which the final will was produced. Then something happened that I had not expected. Christine had requested the attendance of Colonel Douglas Merritt, my current commanding officer, not as a character witness in any dramatic sense. This was probate court, not a trial, but as someone who could speak to the conditions of my 2 deployments and the nature of the communication barriers that had kept me largely inaccessible to my father during the final years of his life. The argument being that isolation from a parent during a critical period of estate planning, when one sibling had constant access and one had almost none, was a relevant contextual factor. Colonel Merritt walked in carrying my service record. He was a quiet man, not given to ceremony. He testified briefly, factually, about the nature of my assignments, the communication restrictions, the operational demands. He spoke for perhaps 7 minutes. At the end, he placed my service record on the table in front of the judge. Judge Aldridge looked at it. She read something, I couldn't see what, from where I sat. Then she looked up at me. "Warrant Officer Callahan," she said, "your record includes a commendation for logistical coordination during a humanitarian relief operation in 2019. You were cited for," she read from the document, "exceptional judgment under complex and resource-constrained conditions." "Yes, ma'am," I said. She set the document down. She didn't make a speech. She simply noted, for the record, that she was aware of the service reflected in the documents before her. Then she asked Nathan's lawyer to continue. But something had shifted. I can't explain it more precisely than that. The shape of the room had changed. 3 days later, Christine called me. The judge had ruled that the addendum was procedurally invalid under Tennessee estate law. The hybrid format, typed with handwritten initials, did not meet the standard for a holographic codicil. The original will, which predated Nathan's increased involvement in operations, had divided the estate more equitably. The farm, under the earlier document, had been designated for both children equally. Christine also noted that the judge had taken the unusual step of flagging the pattern of conduct around the will's revision for the State Bar's Estate Oversight Division. She was clear, this was not a criminal referral, it was a notation, but it was on record. I sat in my car in the Fort Campbell parking lot for a long time after hanging up. I thought about calling Nathan. I decided not to, not yet. There was too much raw space between us, and I didn't know what I wanted to say. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't even particularly relieved, not in the way I had expected. I felt something quieter than that, like something that had been wrong had been corrected, but the wrongness had still happened, and the correction didn't undo it. I called my mother instead. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what Christine had said. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Your father would want you to know that he loved you the same, whatever those papers said." "I know," I said. "Do you?" I looked out the windshield at the parking lot, at the flat Tennessee sky, and the line of vehicles, and the ordinary afternoon. "Yeah," I said. I think I actually do. 6 months later, I used my share of the farm sale. My mother decided to sell it, and we agreed together that was the right thing to fund something I had been thinking about for a while. A small scholarship fund for children of deployed service members in our county, $250 a semester, renewable for kids who were doing the math every August about whether they could afford their school supplies, their sports fees, the small costs that add up into large ones when a parent is overseas and one income has to stretch too far. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was a practical one. That's how my father thought, and I suppose it's how I think too. I named it the Gerald Callahan Memorial Fund. I didn't put my name on it anywhere. That wasn't the point. Dolores, my father's office manager, sent me a card when she heard about it. She said my father used to keep a quote taped to the inside of his desk drawer. She had found it when she was clearing out his things. She had written it out for me by hand. A man's character is what he does when no one's watching. She said she didn't know where he had gotten it. She thought he had written it himself, but she wasn't sure. I have it on my refrigerator now. I still talk to Nathan sometimes. Not often. Not easily. There is a thing between us now that may never fully dissolve, and I have made a kind of peace with that. Not because it's what I wanted, but because some damage is real, and pretending otherwise doesn't serve either of us. We are civil. We are careful. Maybe someday we'll be more. I don't know. My mother comes to visit me at Fort Campbell twice a year now. She drives up by herself, which I initially argued about and have since stopped arguing about, because she is 60 years old and perfectly capable of navigating I-40. She likes to walk around the base and look at things and ask questions about what everything does. Last time she came, one of the younger soldiers in my unit spent 20 minutes explaining the tactical specifications of a vehicle to her, like she was taking notes, and she thanked him with such genuine warmth that he looked like he might cry. She is doing okay. She is not doing perfectly. Grief is not a linear thing, and I've stopped expecting it to be. As for me, I'm still here, still showing up, still doing the work that I chose and that chose me back somewhere along the way. I'm not going to pretend that the last year was easy or that justice is some clean, finalized thing that arrives in an envelope and settles everything neatly. It isn't. What happened was messy and it cost something. Money, time, the uncomplicated version of a family I will never fully get back. I don't have a tidy summary for you. What I have is this. When my father built that company, he did it alone, at 5 a.m. with a single truck and a paper logbook, and the belief that showing up was enough. When I enlisted, I did it for reasons I couldn't fully articulate to him, but that he understood anyway because we were made of the same material. When I walked into that courtroom in my dress uniform, I was not trying to win anything for myself. I was trying to ask the right question on behalf of a man who deserved to have his actual intentions honored. The world does not always honor those intentions. Families fail each other. People who should protect you sometimes find ways to justify not doing so. That is a real thing, and I am not going to sand the edges off it for you. But I also believe this. The asking matters. Showing up matters. Refusing to accept a version of events that you know in your bones is wrong. That matters. Not because it always works, not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because there is a difference between a life where you asked the question and a life where you didn't, and only one of those versions lets you sleep. My father knew that. He showed up for 30 years. I intend to do the same. I've thought a lot about why Nathan did what he did. Not to excuse it. I'm past needing to make it make sense in a way that lets him off the hook, but I think about it because understanding how something goes wrong is the only honest way to make sure you don't repeat it, in your own life, in your own quiet ways. He was there and I wasn't. That's the simple version. And somewhere in those years of showing up every day, sitting across from my father at every meeting, answering every question before my father could finish asking it, somewhere in all of that, Nathan stopped seeing the difference between being present and being entitled. Those are not the same thing. Presence is a form of service. Entitlement is what happens when you forget that. My father built something real. 30 years of early mornings and paper logbooks and contracts negotiated on a handshake. He did it because he believed that if you showed up and did the work honestly, the work would hold. He was right about that. What he maybe didn't fully account for was that the people around you are making choices too, and those choices can quietly reshape the thing you built without you ever realizing it's happening. I don't think my father knew. I have to believe that. The man who kept my photo and uniform on his desk, who told Dolores he worried I didn't know how proud he was. That man did not sit down and decide to cut me out. Something was shaped around him that he couldn't see clearly, and he trusted the person doing the shaping because that person was his son. That's not weakness. That's the particular vulnerability of love. What I learned, what I'm still learning, honestly, is that showing up for your own life is not optional, even when life makes it hard. I was overseas. I had real reasons for the distance, but distance, however justified, creates space that other people fill. That's not an accusation. It's just physics. If you are absent from the table where decisions are made, you cannot assume the decisions will reflect you. Christine Faber followed the thread when anyone else might have told me it wasn't worth the effort. Dolores spoke up about things she had seen and felt uncomfortable about for 2 years. And speaking up cost her something. It always does. These are small acts of courage that don't make the news and don't get commemorated, and they are the things that actually hold the world together. I think about what my father had written in that desk drawer. A man's character is what he does when no one's watching. He believed that. He lived it, and in the end, even through everything that happened, it was that character. Evidence of who he actually was, what he actually wanted, how he actually spoke about me when I wasn't in the room. That made the difference. The outcome wasn't perfect. My family is not what it was. Some things, once they break, leave a mark even when they're repaired. But I asked the right question, in the right room, at the right time. I showed up, and I can live with that, fully, without flinching, in a way I don't think I could have lived with the alternative. That's not a small thing. That's everything.